Welcome to Energy Talks, the podcast for energy nerds and inquisitive folks who like interesting conversation. Today's guest is Justin Mackovyak. He's the VP for Mid-Atlantic Program Delivery for consulting firm ICF, which recently released a report forecasting even higher electricity consumption in the United States over the next 20 years. So, welcome to Energy Talks, Justin.
Thanks. Happy to be here and interested in the discussion today. Been with ICF 15 years or so, and this has been certainly interesting times. So it's a
Well, you know what? I remember back in 2008 when we had, the big financial crisis and electricity demand just flatlined. I mean, it was a combination. I don't know what it was like down in the US, but I know up here in Canada, a combination of energy efficiency from measures from some of the utilities, but also we lost a lot of big load. I mean, things like sawmills and paper mills and so on that didn't survive the crash. And you same kind of trend south of the border, I take it.
yeah, certainly. And those that original big wave of utility programs combined with some of the market pieces that you mentioned definitely did the exact same thing, right? It was kind of flat load growth across the board, and a little bit of a different story today, right? As things have changed.
Yeah, this is crazy. I mean, you're calling for the fastest expansion since the post-World War II electrification boom when everything got electrified, farms and towns and so on that didn't have it.
Mhm.
Um, so maybe lay out for us how much can we expect electricity consumption to increase between now and 2050?
Yeah, I mean, our analysis went around up to around 2050, but we're looking at probably a 78% increase, right? And a lot of that big jump coming between now and 2030, right? Which is a little bit different than the report that we put out a little earlier. The trend is shaping up a little bit faster, so it's you know, and it's not just the overall demand, it's the peak demand as well, right? That's climbing up, let's say 14, 15% by 2030, and then another, up maxing out around 55, 54% by 2050. So it's a pretty steep, climb as we start to look at things.
Now, I remember I talked to an energy modeler, this was 3, 4 years ago, and he said that as the global economy was going to electrify, and for advanced economies like Canada and the United States, probably we would need about 2 to 3 times as much generation by 2050 as we had at that time. So when
Mhm.
I looked at 78%, I actually thought, man, that's maybe not as much as previous estimates. Uh, am I right or wrong in term given where energy modeling was 3, 4 years ago?
Yeah, it's probably no, it's the need has definitely risen a lot quicker, right? I mean, I think when you start to look at um, existing generation capacity, right? It's a pretty major shortfall, right? About 150 gigawatts of if you've looked at what's available today, right? And so it's definitely more significant than it was, years ago. And large, it's not only the capacity and the generation that's driving this, but it's also some distribution problems, right? And just trying to move the electrons across the board. So there's a couple of things that are kind of combining here as we look at this across the board.
Well, let's talk about the sources of growth because I mean, there's a lot of talk these days about data centers, right? So that and cryptocurrencies as well. That's another big one, especially down in Texas. But then there was, and I guess this started through the Biden's administration's clean energy industrial policies like the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act and the Infrastructure Act. So we've got manufacturing that's moving, sort of reshoring or starting up in the US, plus
Mhm.
end use electrification, EVs, heat pumps, building systems. I mean, all of that combined, it's no wonder that it's 3.5, 4, 5% a year.
Yeah, you're exactly right, right? And it's like this kind of. it's a combination, right? The dynamics around the grid are a little bit different too, because it's not just a like a seasonal or daily peak, right? It's this always on plus, different time frames, whether things are charging or not, and manufacturing coming in. So it's growing due to the things you spoke about, but it's also this interesting new shape, right? Load shape that's appearing as well. And so as we start to think about these programs or these challenges, the programs that we've had, we talked about earlier of the energy efficiency programs, they're going to be a little bit different, right? As we try to solve this problem than maybe the traditional energy efficiency, everybody uses a little bit less.
Well, if the load shape of the load curve is changing, what was it, and what's it changing to?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I'd say it varies. It varies all over the board depending on what part of the market we're looking at. But the traditional, we've talked about the duck curve in the past, and which was a big thing when solar came on. But when you look at these, um, what I'll say the rising always on with the data centers, right? And now you have the EV charging that's a little bit different, right? Where maybe still increases in your traditional 4 to 6 people get home from work, plug their car in, right? But what you're also seeing with the building electrification is that some utilities service territories are flipping over to winter peaking, right? Because we're naturally, if we're using heat pumps for as opposed to a fossil fuel, it could be a 6 a.m. The heating's turning on because it's the coldest time, and so that part of it, I think, with the heating and building heating and cooling dynamics have changed a little bit across the board.
What role is there for distributed energy resources here? And when we think of that, we often think of rooftop solar and microgrids and community solar, that kind of thing. But I know we're seeing some move in Canada over towards industrial and large commercial, uh, self-generation and self-storage. And that actually makes a lot of sense to me, because that way it gives them more resiliency in the event of maybe a potential grid outage.
Mhm.
There might be an opportunity, depending on their operation, maybe they can engage in a little arbitrage. I mean, and they're big loads. So when you design the system, it's a lot easier to do that one than it is to do 1,000 or 10,000 little ones in a residential community. What's the take on DER in the industrial and large commercial?
Yeah, it's. I would say the DER, the role of DER is just in general is exactly what you said. It's this idea of being able to dynamically shape the load depending on what the scenario is, right? So certainly the large industrial, as well as the residential stuff, right? I don't want to, the it's everything, and having all the different levers at your disposal. I think one of the areas that we've been working through is bringing that into the resource plan, right? So these energy efficiency, when I think of DERs, I think of energy efficiency as well, right? It's not just your
Sure.
solar piece, right? But all of these resources and assets, they've been around for a while. The data is starting to be pretty reliable, and how do you start to bring that into your resource plan so that those planners can trust it, rely on it, and know exactly when they call upon it, it's going to be there, right? And so we're seeing that starting to come together, which is a great thing. But there's still work to do. And then what I would say related to all of that is regulatory environments here in the U.S. are trying to catch up, right? Because they're have never had to kind of look at it more holistically, right? And so now trying to figure out the accounting and understand how these resources in general are being the costs are being recovered, right, and the value that's being assigned to them all lines up. They've historically been a little bit separate, right? And so, but it's a I think the movement is going in the right direction at this point, and you'll see a lot of positive things.
What about supply side? Like uh, I I've been reading. I get emails from I'm on the NERC, the National Electric Reliability Council, And we've been seeing all of these warnings about potential grid outages, low grid reserves, that kind of thing. And based on what we're seeing in your report, NERC must be really, really nervous. How are we going to see big problems with the American power grid going forward because of the increase in load and because supply just isn't catching up?
I don't think big problems. I mean, I think that there's an opportunity for some, we have to be aware of this, right? And we have to kind of plan for it appropriately. Roughly 80 gigawatts per year is probably what we would need to see, which is certainly a jump, right? But it, you know, it's manageable if we act now, right? And we start to make some adjustments. Uh, it's I think we have to make an investment in everything, right? And that's going to be the big part of it, is try to make sure that we're pushing everything to the max to make sure we catch up, and not just picking one resource across the board. That would end up being a little bit problematic.
Now, the reason I asked the previous question is because I often sit on the United States Energy Association technical briefings as a journalist. And so those briefings often have system operator executives, utility executives, RTO executives, and this question comes up all the time. And I have to say, I've seen some executives sweat,
Oh
right?
yeah,
I
there's
mean,
certain areas, I'm
they're
sure.
they're sweating because they can't get the interconnection queues are long. They can't get supply onto the grid fast enough. They can't get equipment. A lot of the transformers or solar panels, whatever comes from China, so they can't get it. They can't get it quick enough to get the supply on. There are just even gas plants. Apparently now, I don't know if this is accurate across the board, but I saw an estimate in a news story the other day that there's an 8-year backlog to order a gas plant. And it seems like the fates are conspiring to keep utility CEOs up at night worrying about this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's certainly a challenging time, and I don't want to be dismissive of it. Maybe I just always take a more positive look at life in general. But it is going to take a lot of coordination and collaboration and everybody to work to solve it, right? And is it doomsday yet? I personally, I don't think we're quite there, right? But the various stakeholders in the industry need to work together and collaborate and do it quickly, right? Whether that's the developers, continuing to, aggressively build out generation, the utilities looking at this integrated system plan, trusting, some of these other assets that are out there, whether it's energy efficiency or load management, looking at the regulatory environments and making sure that they're moving in a positive direction. So it's going to take a couple wills to keep this thing going in a good direction for us to solve the challenge ahead of us. And again, I'm going to maintain a positive aspect on it and say we can do it. We can figure this out.
Well, okay, so here's another question for you then. And I don't mean to be, a negative Nelly on this, but the general sense I get from interviewing experts about the US grid is it's been underinvested in for a long time. And it's got a little bit old and aged, some of those assets are need to be replaced or upgraded. And A, is that your perception of it? And B, is that a major liability? We don't have the equipment, we don't have the planning processes, we don't have the regulatory systems the regimes that need to be upgraded, that kind of thing. So was the US kind of behind in terms of, modernizing its grid?
I don't know that I would. I guess from my vantage point, I don't know that behind is the right word. I think that it was designed for one thing, and we're expecting it to do something different now. Right. It was designed to move, generation and end user, right? And now we have gone to this very distributed grid where you have you know, DERs, you have two-way, you think about a traffic model, right? If you've designed something that's just one-way streets, right? And now we've introduced two-way traffic on it, and we've increased the population significantly from a traffic perspective. You have congestion and a little bit of a mess, right? And so I always think of it the same way like that is that, we've had a lot of electrification, we've had a lot of increased load, we have a proliferation of DERs across the system, so traffic is moving everywhere. And so we have to make some steps to kind of make those adjustments across the board and do it quickly because as you see, the load growth is continuing to go in a fast way. So it's certainly a challenge, but I don't know that I would articulate it as under maintained or under invested. It's just we're asking it to do something that it wasn't designed to do in the first place.
Yeah, fair argument. Fair argument. Um, One of the issues that comes up all the time, and not necessarily from people within the industry that I've interviewed or sat in on panels with, but it certainly comes up with members of the general public, our audience, and they say, "Wow, it's the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine," or you need if you got a megawatt of generation, you need a megawatt of storage or backup, like peaker plants or whatever it might be. And the experts that I talk to argue that I think they would agree with you, and they say we had this grid. Now we need this kind of grid, more flexible and do all these other things that it never did before. Uh, but if we're able to transition to this, to modernize our grid, it's actually pretty cool. And we can do a lot of stuff. We can integrate a lot of intermittent renewables and DER and all of that. And these old concerns about renewables uh, become much less of a problem. And I just am curious about your take on that.
I think that's totally right. I think some of the challenges around wind doesn't blow, sun doesn't shine, right? Technology has helped solve a lot of that. Battery technology has gotten a lot better over the years. We've been able to improve the way we run even load management programs, right? Where the customer experience is a lot better, so you can have more folks in it, gives you more capacity to work with. And so I think technology has gotten us to the point where we are certainly able to have a more dynamic and to your point, cool grid that can handle all this stuff. It's just now implementing that, right, and getting all the pieces together and moving.
Yeah, sure. And in particular, because it looks to me from the outside like, we're not entirely sure what all the pieces mean. And we're not entirely sure what some of the processes mean. Like what do the rules have to be? What does our market design have to be? We have an idea, but we haven't cracked the code or figured out, we haven't got all the pieces of the puzzle together yet. And is that much of a problem or is
Yeah,
not?
well, you're totally right about the not the pieces of the or not having the pieces of the problem together quite yet. And I think that the challenge with it is that the technology, which is part of the solution, is evolving faster than maybe some of the regulatory markets and just the pace, right? And so every time you think you have, you're solving problem X, but that's long gone, right? Whatever AI gets introduced or a data center situation comes up. So the tech industry, which is also driving a lot of large growth, load growth, right, is also moving at a pace that the utility industry is not moving at, right? And so that is, I would say, more problematic than not having the solutions, right? It's just the speed at which you can adjust and move things around.
Are utilities evolving? I mean, it was 3, 4 years ago. I was reading reports about, the utility of the future. It was going to it was going to evolve into this thing where it would be a platform where it would, sort of mediate the, utility scale sources of generation like gas plants or utility scale solar and also self-generation from, residential and other. And anyway, everything would meet and the utility would have the platform and it would figure all this stuff out. And probably one of the problems with that idea, while it might work in principle, is that utilities that's not how they saw their jobs. I mean, for better part of 100 years, it was all about when you flick the light, there had to be electricity there. So you flick the switch, lights come on. And utilities have this reputation for having a very conservative, engineering-oriented culture. Has this been a bit of a shock for utilities as they've had to evolve to this new model?
It varies by utility, as you would imagine. But they're moving, I think, at a again at a pace that's faster than they've ever moved before. Now, is that the pace that the tech industry is moving? Probably not, or but what I do appreciate about what they're all trying to solve is they still have to manage reliability first, right? And that has to be their key metric, right, as far as performance. So especially as we electrify more stuff, right? So the reliability, you have this idea of affordability, right? Like you can't just throw everything you can at it because it has to get paid for, right? So they have this a balance of how fast can we do this and what's the best way. And so when they start to look at, again, we'll go back to the DERs or the customer programs or all these other resources, solar, like how can we start to value those in a way that they can move, shift, shimmy, and shake, right, to get to the right spot. But it does take a little bit of thoughtfulness across the board, and it can't and I think that sometimes gets perceived as moving slowly, but again, if they do it any other way and the reliability drops, we have a bigger problem, right? And so that it's just a matter of what pressures can they adapt to.
Yeah, fair enough. One of the other issues that comes up is distribution upgrades. I don't know how many times I've heard it. Well, if I plug my EV in and charge overnight at my house, that's great. If three of my neighbors do, probably we can manage that. Any more than that, we're going to blow things up. Transformers are going to be maybe exploding or whatever happens. How much of the distribution network needs to be upgraded, and how big a challenge is that?
Yeah, it's probably the same. When I think about this, the how big of the challenge is, it's probably the same, right? It's moving the electrons where they need to go at the time they need to be there. Um, I think that many of the areas, at least that I work with, utilities that I work with, their distribution systems are sized and ready for short-term growth, right? And so I don't think it's an issue today. But again, they got to start to think about at the pace that this growth is going, they need to be prepared for 5, 10 years out there. And again, trusting the resources. And there's some areas where it's challenging, right? If you're looking at a customer resource as opposed to building a substation, right? Um, how fast can you build that substation versus how fast can you get whatever 10,000 customers to participate in a demand response program, right? The end result's the same, but the speed at which you can do it and trusting and like customers do what customers do, right? And so there's other things that may impact how they participate in a program or not that aren't as clean as just building a construction project. So it's an act that they're working through, and but I would say it's the same, right? It's the same challenge, right? It's the getting the resource for the generation, right? And then it's moving it across the board. And back to my traffic example earlier, right? It's a little bit of everything.
Well, Justin, thank you very much for this. We're watching the American grid with great interest. To me, it's like a petri dish. There's just so much going on, the experimentation, new technologies, demand growth at a crazy pace. It's up in here in Canada. It's very different, actually. We've got, like basically 13 grids, one for each province and territory, and they've all been managed, and they all seem to be, with the odd exception like Alberta, they're pretty stable and reliable, low cost, clean, etc. And we're just starting to feel the pinch that I think the U.S. felt maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago. So you're a bit of a stalking horse for us. We can look over the border and see how you're doing and know that that's what we're going to have to deal with in the not too distant future. So thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great. I'm happy to be here and great conversation.